Hello, Craig. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How about you?
Great, thank you. Can I say Shalom Aleichem?
Feel free. Um, yeah, me, let's say my command of Hebrew is limited. I know what Sheratim are.
You know what?
Sheratim,
Sherutim, bathroom. Okay.
yes,
I
that's what
got
I
that.
know.
Got that.
Well, I also know how to say Ani Hanun, and that's probably more of an Israeli term. Hanun is Israeli for nerd.
Oh, really? Chanun? Really?
Yes,
Interesting. Okay, cool.
yes.
Where am I speaking to you from? You're on the West Coast or East Coast?
I'm uh I'm in San Francisco. How about you?
I am in Long Island, New York.
Uh, my family in Garden City.
I grew up in West Hempstead, which neighbors on Garden City.
Okay. Now, all I know really is that when I'm looking at where I might be headed if I'm not careful, West Hempstead is a possibility.
I live
Yeah.
right now in
There's also-
North Woodmere, which is about 15 minutes from Garden City.
Oh,
What kind of relatives do you have there? Who do you have there?
oh, my wife's sister has a large family there. There are 6 children, and they're starting to take on caretaking responsibility for older members of the family.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so my wife and I do have a place in New York, in Manhattan. We just haven't been able to see much of it recently.
Unfortunately, yeah. I lived on the Upper West Side for about 11 years, but we're kind of a little bit thankful to be out of there right now because all our friends are fleeing the city, sadly. It's very sad.
Well, no one knows what's happening there. We don't know what the new normal will be, except that it will involve a lot more video conferencing.
Sounds about right.
And you'll be glad to know that I do have also let's say, a semi-professional microphone.
Oh, cool.
Uh,
Okay, great. I've seen you've done
and
a bunch of interviews. I was Googling you to prepare. I see I will not be the first person interviewing you, not by any stretch.
no, I'm actually not doing any outbound or proactive media right now. This is a strange year in lots of ways, but I am doing other kinds of media because this is a good time to reveal more about myself. For example, how much I put in practice my values. You probably read something where it says I've already given away well over half my net worth.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's impressive.
Yeah, it yes and no in that that's unusual, but it also is consistent with what our values are supposed to be.
Right, right.
My my problem is that people, because I haven't spoken out, lots of people have fabricated information on what my net worth or income might be, and I don't think there are any accurate reports of that, except a couple of things that I've mentioned that I've said. I mean, a lot of it is just outright fraud. Um, yeah, and I guess I am tired of it.
Well, I'm glad to give you a platform and a forum to set the record straight, and more importantly, to inspire the world and those who will hear this toward philanthropy. This is actually called the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast. So there's no better place
Okay.
to encourage, our listeners and others to engage the way you've been engaging, and really kudos to you because it's really a model that we need more of in our society. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to
Thanks.
formally start the interview. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to welcome a very special guest this morning for him, this afternoon for me, in terms of the time difference, West Coast and East Coast. Craig Newmark, who is known to the world as the founder of Craigslist, but is becoming more known to the world in terms of his generous spirit and his philanthropy. And it's a great honor for us this afternoon, this morning, to have Craig as our guest here on the JPP, on the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast. Welcome, Craig, to the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So let's jump in a little bit. For those who maybe don't know you, maybe you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit, who is Craig Newmark? Just in your own opinion, who is Craig Newmark?
Um, Me, in a way, I'm an old Jewish American nerd, having grown up in New Jersey. In some respects, the hard way. I wasn't very well socialized, and I embodied a number of the nerd cliches: thick black glasses taped together, a plastic pocket protector, and no social skills to think of. Even right now, I'm only simulating social skills. They're not the real thing. But I followed a lot of the same pattern as my peers. I went into computer sciences in part because it's a lot easier to deal with computers than people.
Uh-huh.
Computers are very simple and predictable in comparison to humanity. However, 25 years ago or so, I started this Craigslist thing and did customer service for about 20 years. That changes someone. It doesn't really deal with my fundamental dysfunction, but at least it enables me to fake social skills much better. And I can appear to be listening and empathizing with people now and actually get stuff done. However, this has all led me a lot to now I guess a career in philanthropy, because in Hebrew school, in Sunday school, Mr. and Mrs. Levin taught me a few things like knowing enough is enough and treat people like you want to be treated.
Uh-huh. Beautiful, beautiful principles. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we all learn those things and then kind of forget them, having internalized those principles to a greater or lesser extent. I guess I internalized them, but forgot about their explicit articulation until I hit about 60.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I've been reinforcing the notion.
Let me ask you this question. We'll go back one step at a time. But let me just ask
Sure.
you this. So philanthropy means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and obviously, at age 60, you were blessed to have ample resources to share with the world. But let's say somebody who doesn't have a lot of financial, net worth, etc. How can such a person be a philanthropist? What would you say about that?
Well, this harkens back, I guess, to another lesson from Mr. and Mrs. Levin, Tikkun Olam. The deal is that the world is flawed, and sometimes the best you can do is just not make it worse. But sometimes you have some spare discretionary resources, typically time or money or skills. And I see online a lot of active, actual warfare between people who believe in openness and democracy and values like honesty. And sometimes you can support an organization which is good at fighting the good fight. Sometimes you can volunteer your time or money. But then sometimes in social media, you can just stand up for what you think is right.
Oh.
That's really important right now because the opponents of American democracy, well, they're bearing something I call false witness. And in Sunday school, again, Mr. and Mrs. Levin told us that false witness is bad.
Mhm.
And this was further endorsed by Moses and, for that matter, Jesus.
Mhm.
So, in a way, they directed me to fight disinformation in
Got it.
different forms.
Got it.
And that's a big deal right now.
I hear that 100%. Tell me a little bit about your parents. I read that your father, I think, passed away when you were relatively young. Speak a little bit about the influence that they had on you as a young man.
It's unclear what influence they had on me, if any, at least in a positive direction. I don't remember enough from back then, but I do remember starting off reasonably well socialized. And then things happening such that that started to end. In some respects, I grew up with a very distant mother and father. And in some ways, Mr. and Mrs. Levin in Hebrew school fulfilled some of that role, at least some of the role of parents in Judaism,
Hmm.
because they helped set my moral compass.
Uh-huh.
Maybe that's the real parenting that I received, but since so much of it is murky to me, this is partially guesswork.
Got it. No, I understand what you're saying. Did you grow up in a religiously observant home?
Um, in a somewhat superficially observant home, I observed holidays. I went to synagogue weekly, and after Sunday school, then I would go to Hebrew school twice a week. And I do remember that with a lot of fondness, even though I learned very little Hebrew
Got it. Got
because
it.
the techniques that they used to teach were very ineffective, which
Mhm.
is too bad.
You had a bar mitzvah?
Um, I did have a bar mitzvah. There are a number of incriminating photos. I was I was socially very backwards, and I remember the photographer conspired with the two girls seating around me to embarrass me. And there is a very embarrassing photo still in my possession to that effect. Um, it just has to do with pinching my cheeks, I think.
Got it.
Um, but now, I don't know if I'm superficially observant, but I feel deeply observant given the lessons of my rabbi, who uh, I guess preached that it's more important to follow the precepts of Judaism than the forms.
Does your rabbi have the same last name as I do, Cohen, by any chance?
Uh, my rabbi, who is not performing much anymore, is a Cohen.
That's Leonard Cohen, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
and his music and poetry sometimes is prayer, because I feel if it brings me closer to God, well, that's prayer.
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense. That's beautiful. So, as you were a teenager, as you began going to college in your early years, what did you envision for yourself professionally when you were 18, 19, 20, 21? What were you thinking in that period of your life?
Well, at the beginning, I thought I would be a physicist, perhaps a quantum physicist, probably doing a combination of research and teaching.
Mhm.
However, I realized that I wasn't smart enough, because you have to be the top 1% of teachers and researchers, and you had to know a great deal of math, like you could never stop studying math. And so at the end of my freshman year, I realized, oh, I'm really good with computers, and I want to go into artificial intelligence.
How evolved were computers at that time? I
Oh,
don't know exactly what we're talking about here. Bill Gates,
well,
Microsoft. What were we talking about exactly? Like what stage of computer development was this?
in 1969,
Okay.
my junior year in high school, the school got a IBM 1620, which was a very old but very useful computer. And, I learned computing back then on punch cards using Fortran 2.
Okay. Just figured it out, basically.
Well, there were some self-instructional guides, and I was able to learn to teach myself the gist of computing, and that was fairly good. I got so into it, however, my teachers had to threaten to cut off access because I wasn't doing well enough in my humanities classes.
Uh-huh.
They were right to do so. So I've actually been working with computers for 51 years.
Wow. That was your passion. That was your love. That's what you kind of gravitated toward.
Well, in terms of school, yes, but true to the stereotype of my people and the nerds, I was reading a lot of science fiction.
Uh-huh.
And even now, I'm reading a lot of science fiction.
What, for example? What are you reading?
Oh, right now I'm reading The Tyrant Baru Cormorant, which is actually more about politics than what you would think of as science fiction.
Hmm.
Um, it's just a whole other world, somewhat loosely based on the British Empire, and about people who are trying to make their version of the British Empire not as destructive as the British Empire in the 1800s.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm reading a great deal of it, and I lose track of things because I get through one novel in a few days, and then I pick up another, and I just don't stop.
When do you find time to read? Like, you have a set time when you read, or I'm just curious.
It's kind of when I feel like when I'm in the mood.
Uh-huh.
In a way, you could argue my hobbies are reading and TV.
What do you like to watch on
And
TV?
um, what I'm watching a lot of right now through Netflix are uh, TV that's produced overseas, where you have to be really good at subtitles.
Mhm.
For example, Casa de Papel, translated as Money Train on Netflix. There's also now Cable Girls, Las Chicas de Cable,
Okay.
but I am really enjoying oh Chaos, and now I'm forgetting the Hebrew word for that. The series taking place on the West Bank with a
Fauda?
counter-terrorist
Fauda?
team.
Fauda?
Fauda, that's
Oh,
it,
it's amazing.
Fauda.
Amazing. It's like three seasons already. Incredible.
Yeah, there's other shows that have been recommended that we hope to get to. Right now, though, we have to get through Cable Girls, and then there are other shows coming up on the horizon. We're also watching a Russian show based on Tolstoy during World War One and the Revolution. And this is really good TV, but
Mhm.
you have to keep focus on the titles since I speak no Russian and very, very little Spanish.
Fascinating. My wife and I, we found, particularly during COVID-19, that watching shows together has really been an opportunity to bond with each other. Like late at night, when we each finish what we need to do, we'll lie down in bed, we'll whip out an iPad, go to Netflix, and exactly like enjoy different shows. And it's a real connective activity. It's actually fun to do.
Yeah. But part of the rules are that one is not allowed to watch one of your special shows without your spouse or companion.
Ah, okay, right. That makes sense.
And
No,
there,
that's right. That's the problem because a lot of times I have a desire to watch the thing we're watching, but I can't watch because I have to wait for her, or she's not around that night, or it doesn't work for her. So yeah, you have to have patience when you're doing it with somebody else.
yes,
100%.
that oh, for example, we're watching a French spy show called The Bureau of Legends. Legends meaning in the sense that those are cover stories. And this is a very good show, and there may wind up being an American version of it. But we do love TV. And right now, there's one pending show. We're seeing how long we can go without watching it.
How did you meet your wife?
Oh, in San Francisco nearby, there's a coffee shop that we love called Reverie. And that's actually been my regular meeting place until the lockdown. And but we met 16 years ago there.
I mean, you just bumped into each other. How did you meet?
I think I uttered a very simplistic pickup line.
I mean, you noticed her, you were interested, and
Yes,
you went about your business.
I
You
did.
approached her in some way, which sounds like maybe isn't
Yes,
your nature, isn't necessarily your nature, or wasn't your nature, I guess, growing up. But you mustered the courage to approach the attractive woman, I guess.
I did.
Okay, and
And I got lucky.
she responded in the affirmative?
Yes, not completely nor enthusiastically, but fortunately that's changed.
You had coffee right then and there, or no? You had to get her number and try a later point.
We did, yeah, we did the traditional getting someone's number or maybe email address. I think the first approach was email.
Got it. Okay, and that's what happened. You basically met serendipitously. You basically just You bumped into each other,
Yeah.
you saw her, and you made it happen, basically.
Yes.
How long did you date for until you got married?
Well, I think it was 9 years.
9 years. Wow. Okay.
Yes. And since, uh, see, we already knew that we wanted it to happen. And unfortunately, I have a sense of humor. So what I did was to update my Facebook status, relationship status page. I updated it to say engaged. Then I called her over and asked if it was okay.
That's how you got engaged formally?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. And she said it was okay?
Yes.
Okay. Terrific. Wow. Okay. And she lived in your wife. I mean, you told me she has family here in New York. She was living in San Francisco at that juncture for a long time, or she just happened to have just arrived in San Francisco?
At that point, probably here 10, 15 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Fascinating. And she's also into technology or something completely different?
Not particularly. For example, her background is in technical fashion design.
Oh, wow.
She uses an increasing amount of technology as she takes care of more and more of the business of multiple households. And also she's tech support for her parents.
Got it. Okay, cool. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about the famous Craigslist. How did it begin? What was the vision? What did you see for it? Kind of take me through it a little bit.
There really was never any vision. I had a lot of help from a lot of people when I moved to San Francisco, usually through the internet, even as incomplete as it was then. People helped me understand neighborhoods in San Francisco, restaurants. And after a couple of years of help, I figured I should give back a little bit. This was the beginning of the dot-com bubble. So now and then I was hearing about launch parties, things involving arts and technology. So I started telling friends about it using a simple CC list and email. And that grew word of mouth pretty fast. I asked people what else should be on this mailing list, and they gave me good advice, and I did what made sense. That started the pattern, listening to people and then doing something about it. And then when some particular task started growing time consuming, I could write a little bit of software to make it easier.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I could write code to turn email into web pages. So I had instant web publishing for free and just kept going along those lines.
How were you making a living? How were you making a living at that point?
Oh, at that point, I was a software contract developer,
Okay.
which was and is a really good way to make a living, if you're any good at it. So I figured, hey, I'm doing really well, and I have this hobby, which feels pretty good. Mm-hmm. At one point, though, I was told, and this was at the end of '98, that the approach I was taking using volunteers wasn't working. So I had to make it into a company, and I got advice about it. VCs and bankers were telling me that they would throw billions at me to do things the usual Silicon Valley way. And I decided, well, I remembered what Mr. and Mrs. Levin told me, knowing enough is enough. I was doing well enough to live well and to help out friends and family. So I decided to not monetize much at all, which is the current Craigslist approach. Mm-hmm. So this is not altruistic, not pious. This is just me remembering the values which I learned in Sunday school, maybe around 1960.
Wow. The bankers were seeking you out, or you seek them out? How did these conversations begin?
Usually they happened at industry events or parties. Uh-huh. So that was kind of a time which was a surge of parties involving these new technologies, because they were very new and very exciting. Mm-hmm. And there were sometimes industry events, for example, launch parties. There were launch parties, and sometimes there were just special interest groups meeting. Like there was a virtual reality special interest group, which highly influenced me, even though it was an idea far ahead of its time.
Mhm. People knew who you were, though, at that point. I mean, you were on the scene. They knew who you were.
Mhm. A little bit, and only a little bit. This was all I was just getting to meet people with some difficulty because I'm not a good socializing person. I'm more of the opposite.
Got it. So they were coming to you. They were trying to pitch you. They were trying to get invested in your company, etc. And that was not your back to Sunday school. That was not your thing. That was not really what you were looking for.
Yeah. And Craigslist has never taken an investment. At one point, a former employee sold his equity, but the company itself never needed need an investment because I started things just doing things myself. And frankly, our first hosting cost was $35 a month.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I should add at this point, I'm fully retired from Craigslist. I'm doing full-time philanthropy.
I'm excited to get to that part of our discussion. Why did you name it Craigslist? It doesn't sound like your personality to name it after yourself.
Um, Good catch. I did not name it Craigslist. When I had to give it a name in '95, I'm pretty literal, speaking as a nerd, and I wanted to call it San Francisco Events,
Okay.
mostly still events then. But the people around me, much smarter than me, told me that I had inadvertently created a brand. They were already calling it Craigslist, you know, Craig's mailing list. And so I created a brand. They explained to me what a brand is and why it's important. They were right. And so they named it for me. And that worked out. It meant that I was personally committed, which is why I did pretty serious customer service for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. What was the most meaningful takeaway from your Craigslist experience? If I asked you, reflecting back on the creation of this incredible edifice of communication in the world at large, what are you most proud of? What do you feel? And I would guess your answer is not going to be the money because that's not what you're interested in. So what is?
Well, the best part is that I created something which has helped somewhere between 100 and 200 million Americans just get through the day.
Okay.
Looking at the numbers.
To say, Craig, I've actually never used Craigslist. I know that sounds crazy. My wife probably has, but I've never used it actually.
It only is useful if you need to use classifieds, in the sense that the essence of the accomplishment is that Craigslist will help you put food on the table. Craigslist will help you buy a table, and Craigslist can help you get a roof under which to put the table.
I like that.
And we don't need fancy stuff. We don't normally need a bigger or faster car, but sometimes a lot of people need to put food on the table, and that's pretty big. The numbers, I'm guessing, but based on everything I've read from the measurement firms, that's what I would guess. Although sometimes I might want to pay for a serious study, but that's a whole different thing. And as I say that, I should bring that up with my team, my philanthropy team. Mm-hmm. It would be satisfying to know the numbers.
That's very interesting. That probably would be very worthwhile. What would you say is what would you say has been what was the biggest challenge for you? Obviously, there are times when Craigslist had challenges. It's pretty well known. But what would you say for you? What was the worst moment? What was the lowest point?
Well, the worst point was realizing that the company had been so bad at communications and let bad actors magnify real but not large problems into really big ones. They took control of the narrative in a number of cases, in a number of little ways. And then the bad actors would often run fundraising scams or that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I regret. It's why I've gotten a lot better at communications and even PR. I realized that my sins of omission led to some really big blunders. So I turned that around about 6 years ago, and I'm getting increasingly good at it, or less bad, which is really valuable when it comes to fighting major bad actors these days who are really good at disinformation and other forms of information warfare.
Mm-hmm. So you created an amazing tool that could help so many, but in any type, like any tool like that, there's going to be an opportunity for bad actors.
Well, I'm more worried about big social media platforms, which have not been active enough countering a lot of bad stuff. For example, anti-Semitism. There's now increasing evidence that some of the platforms have known that they've been unintentionally promoting it and strengthening it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason why I'm a significant funder of the Anti-Defamation League,
Mm-hmm.
and working with them to counter anti-Semitism and to counter hate crimes of all sorts. The idea is that I work with them and their direct allies, and also people who are good at countering harassment.
Mm-hmm.
For example, some of the worst on the net that you'll see is harassment directed against Jewish women journalists.
Really? Oh, I mean, this lady from the New York Times, this lady who just recently resigned from the New York Times. I mean, she felt terribly. I forgot her name right now. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Very
I do
terrible.
know the reference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea is harassment is a big problem through the entire net. I dealt with a fair amount of it in customer service, but I've decided to fund a network of networks of professionals spearheaded by the International Women's Media Foundation, since the worst of it is directed against women journalists, and particularly Jewish women journalists, or women journalists who are, I guess they now say, BIPOC.
Why do you think
And
that? Why do you think that is? Why are they most targeted?
the deal is, a lot of people who've been suckered into supporting bad actors, whether they're our foreign adversaries or the domestic allies of foreign adversaries, a lot of them are guys who have, for one reason or another, become misogynists.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason, though, is a lot of the people online who have become most knowledgeable about fighting information warfare, a lot of them are women. And a lot of the people I'm funding, a lot of the organizations are led by women. And for whatever reason, the warriors fighting our foreign adversaries, a large percentage of them, well over 50%, are women.
Interesting. Speaking about, it just dawned on me, speaking about powerful, influential women, and being that you're from San Francisco, do you have a relationship with VP candidate Kamala Harris?
I was working with her, I'm guessing around 15 years ago. She was the DA, and she had a feeling that they were sold a really bad email system. She brought me in to validate her hunch. She was right. And we afterwards would just talk now and then. I just dug up some old photos to that effect. For example, supporting Obama together, and in one case, supporting Stephen Colbert, because way back in the old show, he had a kind of joke which turned into a serious program supporting veterans. Way back, he slipped on the show and actually hurt his wrist. He turned that into a parody called Wrist Strong, which actually raised funding for a veterans organization. And I got a whole bunch of the wristlets, gave them to prominent people, including Kamala.
Oh, cool. It's interesting. Did you make the Giving Pledge? Are you part of that movement, the Giving Pledge, the formal Giving Pledge that many philanthropists have made?
I wonder if I should sign up it formally, but I've already far exceeded the normal practice. Specifically, well, it's a giving pledge for billionaires, and if you think I'm a billionaire, you may be disappointed.
I don't
But
know.
I've already given.
I don't
Yes,
know.
I've already given away well over half my net worth, and I've already done it versus only pledging to do it. The most recent report I've read have been most of the people who've pledged it have only just begun to give it away.
Interesting.
So I figure sometimes I practice what I don't even bother to preach.
Got it. I mean, the point, if I'm understanding you correctly, the point of the pledge is to motivate billionaires to give charitably and to give away their wealth. But thankfully, there are some people, whether they're billionaires or not, who have that value without signing the pledge. They're living it. They're doing it. There's no need to sign a pledge if you're doing it.
Yeah. Also, there should be some way that I can articulate this that it would be very funny. So sooner or later, I'll figure that out. But I do know that I'm not as funny as I think I am.
Okay, most of us are not. Most of us are. Do you have relationships, for example, with like your neighbors like Mark Zuckerberg, or we were talking about some of these platforms where unfortunately people are spewing anti-Semitic, diatribes and all different types of things. Are you in contact with some of the people who run these platforms who have control over these things?
Only vague connections. I've decided that I should find people who are much more articulate, more effective than I am in dealing with the big guys. So I fund those groups to a lesser or greater extent, and then mostly I get out of their way.
Got it.
I say mostly because I do bug them to work with each other and to communicate more effectively using social and mass media. Mm-hmm. For example, one of those groups is the ADL, and there's other groups like the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. Mm-hmm. The idea is that they all work together to stop hate speech and disinformation. And, why should I intervene when I can help people who are a lot better at it than I am? Mm-hmm. And this way I can avoid being a problem and making sure my ego is not a problem.
Got it. No, that's very smart. That makes a lot of sense. Were you always charitable throughout your life? When you were 30, when you were 40, when you were making money and, as a programmer, was that something that you were actively engaged in at those earlier stages?
Not really. I think I started slowly in the late 2000s, mm-hmm. Without much conscious idea of what I was doing, except I was starting to realize that the role of a free press in our country. The way my high school teacher put it, in my own words, is a trustworthy press is the immune system of democracy.
Okay.
So at that point, I'd already been contributing, and it was somewhat substantially, a bit, but then I kicked it off into much higher gear because I realized in 2016 that the immune system was failing. Mm-hmm. And so I needed to stand up and help strengthen it. The immune system of democracy may still be failing us, and we have about 80 days for it to really happen. And I may need to either get louder or to convince people themselves to get louder. And I'll be talking about that with advisors, because maybe I should be louder and maybe I need to talk other people into being louder, or both. I don't know.
It's striking me, and correct me if I'm off here or wrong, it's pretty clear to me that you're a supporter of the Democratic Party, just from what I've read and what I understand. It's interesting that President Trump has coined the term fake news, which is something that it sounds like you're referring to, although albeit probably not from the perspective that he is. Is that accurate, or am I misguided?
I'm not a Democrat, and I support politicians who want to defend the country against our foreign adversaries. I support politicians who are genuinely anti-corruption. The term fake news, as used by many, and they've admitted it, for them fake news is news they don't like.
Right.
So I don't use the term. Yeah, and usually when someone uses that term, that means that they are about to break the ninth commandment.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And in fact, that statement is always true. In the process of using that phrase, they are doing damage to the commandments.
Very, very interesting. So you're saying, just out of curiosity, you haven't voted consistently. You supported President Obama, as you said, but you're saying before that you hadn't necessarily always supported Democratic candidates for president.
I have supported libertarian candidates, occasionally Republican in the past. A problem is that the Republican Party of Reagan is not the same as the party of today.
Right. It must be frustrating. I mean, it's hard to find, it's hard to find a voice in our representative government, in a sense that it must be hard to find the right candidates for somebody like yourself. It sounds like a little bit.
It's a bit challenging at times, and it's disappointing when they decide that they're going to go out of politics. Will Hurd is a Republican congressman in Texas. He's, I think, former agency, CIA, and he's been a strong voice for cybersecurity. I've actually worked with him to that end, and I'm hoping that he continues to do good work along those lines.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about your philanthropic endeavors, ventures. What are your passions? Well, you've talked a little bit about the things you care about, but what are some of the other things that really give you great satisfaction in being able to impact? I'd love to hear a little bit about how do you approach your philanthropy? How do you measure impact? How do you decide how to distribute funds? How does it work?
Well, I decide what areas based on what seems to need to be addressed in a really big way that may not be getting enough attention, and which for I feel some personal affinity, like the whole collection of activities around information warfare, cybersecurity, that kind of thing. The problem is that our country is under attack. Our foreign adversaries have said that they're at war with us, and they're acting on it, and they've managed to place some assets into very high places, and it's time for Americans to fight back and take the battle to the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm supporting, well, not only cybersecurity groups, but even journalism groups, specifically journalism ethics groups, because one ethical principle, which is being articulated now, is that it's wrong to amplify disinformation. But bad guys are really good at playing mainstream news organizations into repeating, let's say, false conspiracy theories and making it part of the nightly news. Mm-hmm. So we got to fight back. Mm-hmm. Another area, in America, we owe our vets and their families a great deal, and we've only begun to start paying that back. I've been working on that for over 10 years. How
did that particular issue kind of get high on your radar? I agree with you 1,000%, but how did it come to speak to you about veterans? You mentioned the Colbert thing. Yeah. I don't know if that was it.
It started in high school when I saw Vietnam vets coming back and being treated very badly. Uh-huh. I was very naive. I didn't know why it was wrong. But then 10 plus years ago, I was at a new PBS NewsHour Rediscovering Democracy thing. Mm. I sat next to a guy at lunch from the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. And suddenly that made sense. Like I don't support the opera, but I should support people who had volunteered to go overseas and risk taking a bullet to protect me. that made sense.
Mhm.
Others, our country owes a lot to teachers who are underpaid and underrespected. So I work with programs to help teachers get the supplies they need to teach, because most teachers are paid very poorly, and yet they have to buy supplies. So I work with a program called Donors Choose, which makes it easier for teachers to get supplies.
Mhm.
And I will support some efforts at random, food security groups like God's Love We Deliver in New York. And since I love birds and I have a sense of humor,
Mhm.
I do support pigeon rescue.
Okay. Fascinating. Do people pitch you on philanthropic endeavors? You just pick them on your own? How do you become exposed to new projects or exciting things that may be coming down the pike that people are working on? Maybe you don't know about it. How do you...
Uh, Both ways. Sometimes they approach me, sometimes I approach them. Today, it's already happened several times in both directions.
Mhm. Fascinating. You have like a formal foundation? Is that the way it works? Like a formal...
Oh, yes. Oh, I have something I call Craig Newmark Philanthropies,
Mhm.
which consists of my foundation and a couple donor advised funds. I figure by having an umbrella term, I don't have to remember where the money comes from,
Uh-huh.
which makes speaking about it far easier. The donor advised funds uh, include the San Francisco Jewish Community Endowment Fund, which was the first donor advised fund I started with, but I tend to spread it around now.
Mhm.
That seems safer. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
Can I ask you how much, and this is probably public information, how much the foundation gives out per year on average?
We haven't disclosed that, in part because I don't have the figures convenient. Um, Towards fighting information warfare and protecting the country, as I define it, over several years, it's right around 175 million right now.
Mhm.
And for that matter, for veterans, for example, the total amount right now is around 20 million.
Wow, beautiful. It's really inspiring.
Well, that needs to increase, but first we have to protect the country this year.
I hear we're taking one day at a time, 1 year at a time, 100%. Let's talk a little bit.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit, Craig, about COVID-19. I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on this pandemic. Is it something that you ever could have imagined happening? Is it something that caught you by surprise? Is it something you were prepared for? And also a little bit about kind of how it's affected your view of the world in which we live.
um, since I read science fiction, pandemics is a consistent, usually subplot theme running through a lot of things that I've read or watched. So I was kind of prepared for it, although I never thought about the economic impact. A
Mhm.
lot of people are suffering economically because of it.
Mhm.
What I didn't expect was that our country's leadership would ignore the pandemic for political reasons and possibly reasons of vanity, such that the economic effects are far worse than they would have been. And there's a lot more sick people, dead people, because the problem was ignored for a couple months or so. And I've spoken to specialists who say that if we acted immediately, there would be a great deal less suffering.
You're saying, let's say
Um,
January through March of 2020, if I'm understanding you correctly, there were people who obviously were in the know about what was going on and didn't act quickly enough. Am I understanding you correctly?
uh, that's true. Plus, the country was not well prepared as of a few years ago, as of 5 years ago, but the country was somewhat prepared until those preparations were destroyed. So again, some things went wrong that would have greatly alleviated suffering,
Mhm.
and that's not good.
Right. How do you see just now, things obviously played out the way they have for worse, obviously, based on the perspective that you're sharing. How is this whole pandemic impacted the way you see how you go about your own life, or the way you're obviously a very caring, giving person way before this happened, but has this even redoubled your efforts to do more charitably? What are some other perspectives you have based on what you've observed?
Charitably, I stay focused on the defense of our country, and to a lesser extent on some efforts which directly send cash to people often who need it, like people in the restaurant industry.
Mhm.
I've done a little bit of that, not enough, but I'm not sure what's most effective. Beyond that, I've been working at home increasingly for over 25 years,
Mhm.
so that's not so hard. The thing I find interesting is that a lot of change has been accelerated by the pandemic. For example, whatever's happening to higher education is accelerated. And in a number of fields, higher education may not be a good match for some things. Um, Part of the new normal also is the use of video online to some larger extent, unknown extent, because when the pandemic is over, people will still meet face to face a great deal, but sometimes a video call is just fine.
It's funny because I'm a lot of people that I speak with now. I say, let's set up a Zoom. They'll be like, I'm zoomed out. I can't. I don't want to look at you. I just want to talk on the phone. It's like they want to be old fashioned. It's very interesting how
Well,
it is curious. Meaning, am I ever going to have a coffee again, like the way you met your wife? Is that something that's gonna happen again, or are people going to continue
yeah,
the way we go about socializing and doing business?
yeah. So in a year, the new normal will have established itself, and for better or worse, and probably a combination of both.
Hmm. Do you think there'll be a second wave, or where do you think we are in this process right now? What inning?
I don't know if the wave metaphor is one that makes much sense, because it's just hitting and hitting hard, and no one really knows how it's going to go.
Mhm.
So that kind of stuff, I think I'll just wait to see what happens with people.
Do you feel comfortable leaving your home? I mean, you're basically staying put. What are you doing out there on the West Coast?
Oh, we're pretty much just staying put. We would like to see our we would like to see our New York place again. So I think in September we'll spend a week there. Um, yeah, we don't see a problem, particularly since my wife and I have both had COVID
Oh, really?
and now test clean.
Oh, wow. How did you catch it? Just you were out socially? How did you know how you caught it? You don't know.
No idea. We took all the precautions. It just happened.
I mean, when did you catch? At what point did you catch it?
Uh, Guessing, and unscientifically guessing, early April.
Uh huh. And were you very sick or just moderately sick?
I had no symptoms.
Uh huh. So you felt fine. You just tested positive. You're saying.
Yes.
And your wife was the same thing.
Uh, let's say I'll respect her privacy,
Okay.
especially since I think she's in earshot.
No problem. No problem. Not my business. I'd love to ask you. It's kind of as we've been talking. I was wondering to myself, have you ever visited the state of Israel?
I've been there twice, usually for business, tech reasons, that kind of thing. And oh, yeah, I really liked being there, and I would like to get back. I prefer uh, Jerusalem in that area, since while it's hot, it's dry. Tel Aviv is way too humid for my taste.
When was the last time you were there? When was the second trip?
I think it was about 8 years ago, but I've lost track of time entirely.
Got it. Okay, but I mean, you've been there in business context both times that you were there.
Yes,
Does Craig look?
although I
Craig,
did
yeah,
see, yeah, I saw the usual sights.
got it, got it. Does Craigslist have a presence in Israel? Does it have offices or anything like that?
Well, our only office is in San Francisco, and I shouldn't say or are anymore since I'm retired.
Mhm.
Um, there are sites throughout the world, but we're pretty much a U.S. centric site.
Got it. Okay, as we wind down the interview, so I want to just ask you two more things. Other than Rabbi Leonard Cohen, who are your biggest heroes in the world today?
Um, in a way, it's pretty much Leonard Cohen, since he created a career for himself, which meant a great deal to many millions. And he lived and ended his life successfully, despite problems. And again, his music is prayer, and that works for me.
When he left this world, was that difficult for you, or not? What was your feeling at that time?
It felt like he was doing it very well.
Hmm.
And he prepared well and with a lot of dignity.
Hmm. Okay. And finally, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm curious, you're obviously a thoughtful person, an intelligent person. I'm not asking you who you're voting for or who you want to, and I'm asking you what you think will happen in early November. Just whether it's to your liking or not, what do you project or what do you feel? How do you think things will turn out? I won't hold you to it, but I'm curious what you're thinking, what you see.
I think Americans will work together to defeat our foreign adversaries, and they are American partners. They're domestic allies who are supporting them. And we're going to have to rebuild our democracy. We'll have to rebuild our domestic institutions like the post office. And things are only going to get better.
You're optimistic for America's future.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. You feel like we're even moving in the right direction right now, or not just there yet?
Overall, bad direction, but there's a growing movement which I think will turn things around abruptly and persistently.
Okay. And those who understand that will read between the lines, and those who don't.
Okay.
Anyway, Craig, I want to thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your insight, for your experience. It was really very enjoyable meeting you, getting to know you, and to give you this platform to share some of your views, some of your experience with our listeners. And I wish you only continued success in all of your philanthropic endeavors to continue to make a great impact on the world at large and protecting America, which is a great country, a country that we all love. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Okay. Be well. I'd love to stay in touch. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Nice to meet you, Craig. Good luck. Okay. Take care. Have a great day. Be well.